My knee was pressed into the middle of his back, his face against the cold kitchen floor, when my daughter finally started crying. Not the scared, suppressed kind she'd been doing for years. The real kind, the kind that means it's over. I want to tell you how we got there. People look at me and they see a retired guy who likes woodworking and drives a sensible truck. I'm 63 years old. I've got gray at my temples and I take a blood pressure pill every morning with my coffee. My son-in-law, my ex-son-in-law now, he saw exactly that. He saw a man who was no threat to anyone. He saw someone he could dismiss. He wasn't entirely wrong about the surface of it. I do like woodworking. I do drive a sensible truck. I coach youth hockey on Tuesday evenings out in Canada. I volunteer at the food bank twice a month. I am, by most reasonable measures, a quiet man living a quiet life in suburban Ottawa. What he didn't know, what I'd never told him, because it never came up and because I've never been the kind of man who needs people to know things about him, was that I'd spent 22 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, Joint Task Force 2. I left the forces when I was 45, after my wife Elaine was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. She needed me home. That was the only reason I left. She passed 4 years later. I've spent the last decade or so trying to figure out who I am without the two things that defined me for most of my adult life. My daughter, Natalie, knew. She grew up watching me leave and come back, leave and come back. She knew more than most kids would have been allowed to know. Because I still believe, that children should be told the truth about the world in age-appropriate doses. When she was 16, after a particularly bad news cycle, she asked me directly, "Dad, what do you actually do?" And I told her, as much as I was able. She sat with it quietly for a long time and then she said, "Okay, that makes sense." She was always a serious kid, careful. She thought before she spoke, which her teachers loved, and which frankly made me proud, in a way I couldn't always articulate. She met Robbie when they were both 24 at a work function downtown. He was in commercial real estate, handsome in a practiced sort of way, confident the way men are, when things have always come easily to them. He liked me fine at first, I think, in the way that men like their girlfriends' fathers when they're trying to make an impression. He shook my hand firmly. He asked about hockey. He paid for dinner the first time we all went out together. I noticed things, though, small things, the kind of things you're trained to notice. The way he spoke over Natalie when she was mid-sentence. The slight correction in his voice when she told a story differently than he remembered it. The way she glanced at him before answering certain questions, checking, calibrating. These were not alarms. Not then. They were data points. I logged them and I watched. They got married when Natalie was 27. The wedding was at a venue out in the Gatineau Hills. Beautiful day. Elaine had been gone 3 years by then, and I walked my daughter down the aisle alone and thought about how proud her mother would have been of how she turned out. I danced with Natalie to a song Elaine had loved. I did not cry at the wedding, but I came close. After the reception, when most of the guests had gone, Robbie and I stood outside together for a few minutes. He'd had a few drinks by then. Not sloppy, but looser. He made a joke about how he was taking her off my hands, which he thought was funny and charming, and which landed in my chest like a stone. I smiled and said nothing. I kept watching. The first year of their marriage seemed fine from the outside. They bought a house in Barhaven, semi-detached, good neighborhood, close to schools for when that time came. Natalie was working in healthcare administration. Robbie's career was going well. At family dinners, they seemed like a normal young couple navigating normal young couple things. But Natalie started calling less. And when she called, she sounded carefully neutral in a way that felt like effort. And when I visited, I noticed she jumped slightly when a door slammed. Small thing. Data point. I said nothing. I have learned over a lifetime that saying nothing is sometimes the most disciplined response available to you. I waited. I stayed close. I made sure she knew, without saying it explicitly, that I was always there. When Natalie was 30, she told me she was pregnant. I drove over immediately with a rotisserie chicken from the grocery store because I didn't know what else to bring, and I was so happy I needed to do something with my hands. Her son, Owen, was born the following spring. He was small and loud and had Elaine's eyes, and I sat in the hospital chair, holding him, for about 40 minutes while Natalie slept, and Robbie was somewhere down the hall on a call. Owen changed things. He always does a baby. The shape of a marriage shifts, one way or another. In their marriage, it shifted badly. Robbie didn't adjust well to not being the center of things. That's the most clinical way I can put it. He resented the attention Natalie gave the baby. He resented the disrupted sleep and the changes to their social life. He started drinking more. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would register as a crisis to someone who didn't know where to look, but more. A couple of beers on weeknights. Most of a bottle of wine with dinner. Whiskey on weekends. And the control, which had always been there in soft forms, hardened. Natalie told me later, much later, that he had been slowly reshaping her world for years. Who she saw, what she spent money on, what she wore, how she described herself. By the time Owen was 2, she had drifted away from most of her friends. She rarely visited me without Robbie present. Her world had gotten very small, and she had gotten very quiet inside it. I knew. I didn't know the specifics, but I knew. About 8 months before everything happened, I asked Natalie to go for a walk with me along the river path near my house. Owen was with Robbie that afternoon. It was October, cold, leaves down. We walked for a while without saying much. Then I said, "If you ever need me, I need you to tell me." Not in a way he can intercept. Something just between us. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You know, I've known for a while," I said. "I didn't want to push, but I need you to know the door is always open." We worked out a code. Something simple. Something that would look innocuous to anyone else, but would be unambiguous between us. If she ever texted me asking whether I still had her old copy of Anne of Green Gables, the specific edition Elaine had given her when she was 9, I would come. No questions, no delay. I would come. It sounds maybe melodramatic, like something from a thriller, but I have seen enough of the world to know that sometimes a person needs an exit that isn't visible to the person making them feel they can't leave. We hugged goodbye by my truck. She seemed lighter. Sometimes just knowing the door exists changes the weight of being inside the room. I went home and I made sure certain things were in order. I won't be more specific than that. I simply made sure I was ready. 8 months passed. Normal months, or what had become normal. I saw Natalie and Owen when I could. Robbie was present at most gatherings, pleasant enough on the surface. The practiced handshake, the right amount of eye contact. But his drinking had gotten worse. I could see it in the blurring around his edges. The slight over-precision of his speech, when he was trying to seem sober. Natalie looked tired in the particular way that people look when they've been managing fear for a long time. I was in my workshop on a Thursday evening in February, finishing a cedar toy chest I was building for Owen's room. It was cold outside, maybe -15, proper Ottawa winter. I had the radio on low. The workshop smelled like cedar and sawdust, which is one of my favorite smells in the world. I was completely calm. I remember that specifically, how calm I was, right before. My phone buzzed on the workbench. A text from Natalie. "Hey Dad, random question. Do you still have my old copy of Anne of Green Gables? The one Mom gave me?" Owen was asking about it. I put down the chisel. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. This is what training does. It doesn't make you feel nothing. It makes you feel everything in a way that doesn't interfere with function. I was aware of every sensation at once. The cold air, the weight of the phone, the smell of cedar, the deep animal urgency rising in my chest and being immediately sorted into something usable. I texted back, "I'll check and bring it by." I was in my truck in under 2 minutes. The drive from my house to theirs in Barhaven is about 12 minutes in normal traffic. It was 9:30 at night in February with no other cars on the road. I covered it in 8. I didn't call the police on the way. That's a choice I've thought about since. What I knew was that I didn't know what I was walking into, and I needed to get eyes on my daughter before I knew what kind of response the situation required. I've learned not to overcommit to a plan before you have ground truth. What I found when I got there, the front door was unlocked. I could hear Owen crying from upstairs. Not the scared kind of crying, just the overtired middle-of-the-night disruption kind, which told me he was okay. In the kitchen, Natalie was against the counter with her arms wrapped around herself and a red mark beginning to show on the side of her face. Robbie was pacing. He had a glass in his hand. He turned when I walked in, and for a moment he was confused. The in-laws don't just walk in at 9:30 on a Thursday. What are you? He started. I don't need to describe the next 30 seconds in detail. I'll say that I didn't hit him. I didn't need to. What I have after 22 years of training is a certain kind of efficiency with space and leverage and positioning. Robbie ended up face down on the kitchen floor, with my knee between his shoulder blades, his right arm controlled, going nowhere. He said a few things, angry things, then frightened things. I said nothing. I was listening to my daughter. She had her phone in her hand. Her voice was very steady when she said, "I'm calling 911. I said, "Go check on Owen first, then call." She went upstairs. I heard her voice go soft and reassuring, "Hey, buddy, it's okay, Mama's here." Owen quieted within a minute. She came back downstairs. She called. The officers arrived from the Barhaven detachment in under 10 minutes. Two of them, a man and a woman, both sharp and professional. When they came through the door, they found me exactly where I was. Robbie exactly where he was. I identified myself calmly. I explained what I had arrived to find. The female officer looked at me carefully. She had a particular quality of attention that I recognized. "Sir," she said, "were you service?" 22 years, I said. JTF2. I retired in 2006. She nodded once. No more questions about me specifically. They took over from there. I stood to the side and let them work. Robbie was arrested that night. The charge was assault. The mark on Natalie's face was documented. Her statement was taken. There would be more legal process to come. But that night, it was clear and straightforward in the way that nights with witnesses and documentation tend to be. Owen was brought downstairs once things were quiet. He was 3 years old and had no real understanding of what had happened. Only that there were strangers in the house and his mother was crying and his grandfather was there. He walked directly to me and put his arms up, and I picked him up and held him the same way I'd held him in the hospital the day he was born. He was warm and smelled like sleep, and he patted my cheek with one hand the way little kids do when they're checking whether you're real. "Hi, Grandpa," he said. "Hi, buddy," I said. "Everything's okay." Natalie sat at the kitchen table after the officers had finished with the initial paperwork. The red mark on her face had deepened to a bruise. She looked exhausted in a way that wasn't just the night. It was the years. The long, accumulating exhaustion of being afraid in your own home. I sat down across from her. I didn't say "I told you so." I didn't say, "Why didn't you leave sooner?" Those are things people say when they don't understand how it works, how the architecture of control is built to make leaving feel impossible. I understood. I'd seen versions of it in other contexts. The mechanism is always the same. I just said, "You sent the code." She looked at me. Her eyes were red. "You came," she said. "I always will," I said. She nodded slowly. Then she put her head down on the table and cried for a long time, and I stayed right where I was. Robbie was convicted 8 months later. I won't go through every detail of what followed. The court dates, the legal motions, the back and forth that is the Canadian justice system doing what it does. Slowly, but eventually. What I'll tell you is that he received a conditional sentence with significant terms and a permanent peace bond. He is not permitted within 500 meters of Natalie, of her home, or of Owen's school or daycare. Natalie filed for divorce. It took 14 months to finalize. She got the house. He got almost nothing. Her lawyer was excellent. Her family was present. She was not alone for a single step of it. Owen is 4 now. He doesn't ask about his father. Maybe that will change as he gets older. Probably it will. And Natalie and I have talked at length about how to handle that honestly and carefully when it comes. For now, he is mostly concerned with hockey, dinosaurs, and whether his grandfather can be persuaded to have Fruit Loops in the house when he visits. The answer is always no, but he keeps trying, which I respect. I think about the system Natalie and I built, that simple, fragile thing, a book title and a text message, and how much weight it ended up carrying. It worked because she trusted that I would come, and because I had made absolutely certain that I would. That's the whole of it. Not strategy, not training, not 22 years in the forces. Just a promise, made on a cold October afternoon by the river, and kept. Elaine used to say that love is mostly just showing up. She meant it in the ordinary sense. Being present, being consistent, being there for the small things as much as the large ones. I've thought about that a lot. I think she was right. I think the code worked, not because I'm a particular kind of person with a particular kind of background, but because Natalie knew down to the bone, that when she sent it, I would come. That knowing is the thing. That's the gift a parent can give that no one else can replicate. I went back to the workshop the following night. The cedar toy chest was still sitting on the bench where I'd left it, chisel beside it, radio unplugged. I turned the radio back on. I picked up the chisel. I finished the chest over the following week. It lives in Owen's room now, full of the small trucks and foam dinosaurs and dress-up costumes that are the current archaeology of being 4 years old. On the lid, I carved his initials. Small, neat, the kind of work you can only do when your hands are steady. They have always been steady.